So welcome everyone. As you know, I'm Kelley Keehn. I'm your host for this first ever roundtable on fraud prevention. I'm so very thankful for all of you to be here today. And I'm really thankful to our sponsor, ETF Capital Management, and the founders, Larry Berman and Jared Rabinowitz, who really made this possible. So that's great. And to all of you, because every single day you are working so hard to protect Canadians, empower Canadians, and educate them, surrounding issues of identity theft, fraud, and investment scams. So it's just such a thrill to have you here. We have Daniel Williams from the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre. You're a senior fraud specialist. Cairine Wilson, Vice President, Corporate Citizenship with the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. Jennifer Fiddian-Green, Forensic Partner with Grant Thornton. Yeah. Commissioner Lucie Tedesco with the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. And John Russo, Vice President, Legal Counsel, Corporate Secretary, and Chief Privacy Officer. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. So let's start off with our first issue. Now, all of us at this table, I think, can attest that cyber crimes have changed dramatically from, some kid in a basement just seeing if he could, hack something at school, seeing what he could get into, where today it is 100% criminal, and it goes beyond our borders to that of Russia and China, and it's organized. So what I wanted to hear from the table is what trends are we seeing in fraud and in cybercrime? Maybe, Daniel, you could start us off with that, please.
Well, the losses reported by Canadians to cybercrimes are just, off the charts. The Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, we started back in 1993 tracking mass marketing fraud, which at that time was really sweepstakes that came to you by mail. You responded to it, gave the bad guys enough information to know who to target, and then you got follow-up phone calls that would end up, costing the victims, hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. The internet, it seems, was invented for the sole purpose of fraudsters doing their job. It has made life so incredibly easy for them. The numbers that now that they're able to contact in a click of a button is would have taken the old school scammers months, if not years, to do. It's really the crimes of persuasion remain the same. The suspect wants to convince you that they have something of great value that you can get for them for a small upfront fee. It's just, the use of the technology by the bad guys makes it just so easy for them to reach everybody.
Yeah. Anyone else see any trends moving forward?
We see a lot of the callers to our call centers are victims of hacktivism. We've seen a significant increase in those calls, and the poor Canadians who are victimized are really hurt badly.
So hacktivism, we have a whole new neologism for what's happening because of the internet, right? So this is just people being hacked and actually criminals going after individuals as a career, right? Now, on that vein, I'm sure it goes without saying that victims are up. What the dollar amounts are up as well. Cairine, I know that CPA Canada does a fraud survey almost every year for the last several years. Can you tell us about some of those findings?
Mm-hmm. Happy to. Yes, we have been doing a survey every year for the past 3 years, basically to find out Canadians' attitudes toward fraud and also the incidence of fraud. So our most recent survey last year, we found that 1/3 of all respondents have been victims of fraud. And that number has remained relatively flat over the 3 years that we've been doing this survey. And certainly we have found that the most prevalent types of fraud are credit card fraud at 67%,
Wow.
followed by debit card fraud at 29%. And interestingly, this year, we saw quite an increase in online fraud, which was up to 16% versus 6% in 2014.
And John, I know Equifax has some numbers, like actually when it comes to identity theft. Can you tell us about that?
Love to, Kelley. So with the increase of online fraud, as my friend had mentioned earlier, we've also seen increases in true fraud victims. So over the last 3 years, we're averaging about 30,000 calls people putting true fraud victim alerts on their credit files here in Canada. We used to see about 10, 8, 9, 10,000 about 5 years ago. That's tripled over the last 3 years alone. With the increases in data breaches, identity theft, online accesses, hacktivism, we've seen a significant spike in those numbers.
Yeah. And I don't know, does anyone have actually accurate numbers of, what's being reported? Because kind of going into my next question, there's just so much shame and embarrassment oftentimes when it comes to talking about something as diverse as what we're talking about. Maybe identity theft, we're okay talking about that, but when we're a victim of fraud, when we're a victim of a romance scam, of clicking on that phishing email, of being a victim of Earl Jones or Bernie Madoff, we don't have those numbers. It's so incredibly small. So maybe Jennifer, you can lead us and talk about how do we protect ourselves as Canadians and also, get those reporting numbers up.
So it's really important, I think, as in our conversation today, as we talk about this, that the people who are victims, whether it's the identity theft or the different types of frauds, that we give those people some confidence so that they can be confident victims, because a lot of this is happening, it's completely out of their control. Yes, there's some times that we, and we feel guilty, we shouldn't have clicked here, we shouldn't have answered, we shouldn't have, we should not have we should have hung up the phone, we should have deleted the email, but we are being targeted. We are being targeted. And if we go back to the hacks and the cybercrime and groups that we don't even know about in parts of the world that we are not even thinking about are going after our data, that's out of our control. Right? So when this happens, I want those individuals, those victims, to say, okay, wait a minute, somebody's used my data. I didn't do anything wrong here, right? This is impacting me, and I need to do all the right things. But the places that those criminals took the data, took my personal confidential information, my credit file, my SIN number, my name, my address, where they took it to, I want to raise a lot of awareness with those groups that they have to be more responsible in receiving the data. So this is not just all resting on the victim. I want them to stand up and say, no, this has happened to me, and I need to hold responsible the people who are not using my data that the bad guys, that the criminals have. So how do we get people to feel better about reporting this and bringing it forward so we can learn more, raise more awareness? I want people to know it's not all their faults. People are being targeted, and we need to, as a group, as victims, to stand up confidently and say, okay, wait a minute, I need to be a part of ending this,
and you say
right?
We because you were a victim, and we will get to that in a couple of minutes. We want to hear your story, and I think more of us have been. Lucie, can you also touch on that, and also maybe how we get Canadians to build that confidence to report?
I really think it's largely a question of mindset. Say your house is broken into or your car is vandalized, you don't hesitate to call the authorities. But for some reason, that's not that doesn't ring true for fraud and identity theft. And so I think we have to change, as Canadians, we have to change our mindset and take the same approach we do with other types of crimes.
Daniel, what are you hearing? You're at the front line of getting those calls and getting those emails. Heart-wrenching, I'm sure, many times. What are you hearing? What do you see as maybe some ways that we can help empower Canadians to feel that we can change this and fight the bad guys by all being more unified and educated?
Well, consumers need to know that their efforts matter, that
that's right.
the energy that they put into reporting, whether to an authority like the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, their local police, even their neighbours, the local media, any of the energy that they put into that is going to absolutely diminish the power of the bad guys, phenomenally. Every day we live the fantastic story of people phoning in and saying, I had $3,500 in hand. I was on my way to Western Union to send off money on such and such scheme. I overheard, I saw, I read a story that was so similar to what I was involved in. I had to stop, take a look. Here I am. I've saved myself the $3,500. So regardless where you are in the stream of being scammed, your information is going to help. If it's right at the start, you may have a fresh phone number that authorities can shut down, thereby preventing, one wing of a crime cell from doing their damage. And if you've already lost your money, there's going to be a money trail that will, help at least some people avoid being scammed. So
So if you've already been scammed, at least report it so we can help other Canadians as well. John, would you like to
But
contribute?
proactively, there's proactive measures that consumers can take as well. Simple tip as checking your credit file at least once a year, right? At least do it
And they
once
can
a
do
year.
that for free, right, John?
They can do it for free. There's a myth in Canada that people
Yeah.
think they could only get their credit report once a year for free.
And it doesn't hurt your score either to check it.
Doesn't impact your
That's right.
score whatsoever when you check your file. You're not looking for credit, you're just looking at your file. So you can do it 365 days a year in Canada. In the US, it's a little different where you're allowed one free file a year, and then you pay for the rest. In Canada, it's unlimited. So at least once a quarter, we say to consumers, go out, check what's on your file, make sure everything's there is fair and accurately represented, because you don't want to wait till you go to apply for a mortgage, then it's too late.
Yes.
And you want to look for fraud. You want to look for any credit lines that have been opened, any attempts to change your address, to send your mail somewhere else. Those will all be relevant indicators on your file. So that's a simple tip and a free tip.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Jennifer, you mentioned being in the first person, being in the victim seat. Maybe briefly, could you tell us what happened? And also, I mean, I know the background of this story. Did you feel that the banking industry did enough to stop that from happening in the first place? And what lessons can we learn as an industry and as you, as somebody that went through it?
So it's many years ago now. I was at my place of work, and I got a call from building on what you just said, John, a mortgage collector saying, Ms. Fiddian-Green, you're late on your mortgage payments and you're behind. And what is this? I was not expecting that call. And so fast forward a few days, and I'm now investigating my own case because I'm a forensic accountant. I do fraud investigations for a living. And I find out that my identity, my personal confidential information has been stolen by a group of very organized, you talked about how it's organized today, an organized crime group, who probably had a whole list of names, and I was just one of those names. And they had my data. And 2 properties have been purchased in my name, and mortgages were obtained in my name. And so on paper, I actually owned property, but I also owed the mortgages on those properties, which in our financial system today, you can actually obtain mortgages that are worth more than the value of the property if you do things like work with other groups in organized crime to inflate the value of the property. You put a little money off to the side with the seller of the property, say, here's a number we'll put on paper, but I'll get some number to you this way, maybe a lawyer's involved. So it was substantial. And so getting back a little bit to your question, I had no intention of this happening, was able to see now how this crime, how our financial system is set up in a way that these crimes can be perpetrated. And here's me with my information not having any idea that this is going on. So I had a real, some insight look and a real call out to the credit agencies, to the mortgage company that lent the money, the banking system, to say, you have to really do a better job of making sure when the person comes forward with that identity information and they're not the real person, that you're doing the right things to make sure that they're the right people. So once this happened to me, the banking system helped me a lot because I was a knowledgeable victim. I was an upset, frustrated, overwhelmed victim, but I was knowledgeable and I was an investigator. So they helped me a lot. But we could see as we went through that there were significant gaps in the system. Right. That I think the institutions that are using the data, the criminals get our data, they want to do something with it, right? They want to go access the financial system for money. So we need to make sure the financial system is doing the right things, and it's not all sitting on the shoulders of us as victims who are just going about our days, right? We do need to protect our information, but our information is, I'll put it out to the table, I think our information today, we live in a world where it's pretty highly accessible. No matter what I do, and I'm going to try to do all the right things. I'm going to shred. I'm going to protect my information. I'm not going to give it to anyone I don't trust. But it is in so many different parts of our world. It's accessible, and we have to live in that world. Right?
And I do want to come back to that in a couple of questions as well. Of how do we not just protect ourselves, but what do we do when companies aren't protecting us? Now, Lucie, Jennifer's case is quite severe, devastating, but not the norm. However, I think a lot of people are very familiar with credit card theft, with maybe some of the smaller ones. What rights do we have as consumers regarding this area?
Well, credit card and debit card issuers do afford consumers protection for any unauthorized transactions on lost or stolen credit cards or debit cards. That's a right consumers have. But consumers in turn also have a responsibility to take an active role in their own protection. For instance, not sharing their PIN, their personal identification numbers. Many individuals, many people, many Canadians don't know that if they make their PIN numbers too obvious, they may not be protected by the financial institutions. So as I was handing over my son his first debit card, I told him 3 things. I said, don't share your PIN number with anyone, family, friends, don't do it. Change your PIN regularly to ensure that you're try to be one step ahead of the hackers. And the next thing is, make your PIN easy to remember but difficult to guess.
Right.
So using your dog's birth date or your own birth date or your mother's birth date, your friend's birth date, that doesn't cut it anymore. You have to be a little more innovative than that. And if you're having trouble remembering your PIN and you need to write it down, go ahead, write it down, but please don't put it in your wallet.
Right.
And don't keep it next to your computer. You have to keep it in a secure spot. And now they even have apps for that, right? So keeping your PIN secure, apps for keeping your PIN secure.
And I'll add that, we'll talk about a SIN in a moment, but that it's not part of your social insurance number, it's not part of your driver's license, anything that would also be in that wallet that wouldn't actually be written down. So great, those are some really great tips for protecting consumers. But as we just talked about, so John, if I can come back to you, how about when we've done everything possible? We've shredded, we've protected our PINs, we've checked our credit, we're doing that, but we have these breaches. We have companies, sometimes even governments, sometimes big institutions in the U.S. that we think we're protected. What do we do as consumers when that happens?
Well, now it's the law. I mean, the law is breach notifications coming shortly here in Canada. So companies are obligated now to advise consumers when they've lost your information. So that's the law. What you can do is hold them accountable. So I'm surprised by the amount of institutions that lose your information, say sorry, send you a letter, and you're on your own. It's remarkable. Most companies that want to maintain that customer goodwill, because not only their customers are looking at them, but future customers are looking at their what they're doing. They offer them such things as credit monitoring or protection, ID theft monitoring. So that at least gives the consumer some comfort. Like in Jennifer's case going forward, you are able to track that. So anybody who's applied for credit in your name, she would get that alert in real time on her phone saying somebody's applied for credit in your name. And if it's you, that's fine. If it's not you, then you would call the bureaus, you would call the institution, you would call law enforcement, Canadian Anti-Fraud Center, and get those people in action right away. Because the longer you wait, 90 days, you're going to get that call from the collection agency saying, oh, by the way, where's your money? You haven't paid. Paid what? So proactively, organizations and corporations have to be responsible to do the right thing.
Yeah, and the next question I really want to throw to the table is do we need to see some industry changes? So I know in Canada it's different with credit reporting and how that works, where you can put a proactive fraud alert on your report and they have the credit freezes in the US, which we do not have. One thing though, a really popular cyber blogger that I'm following, Krebs on Security, is writing about in the U.S. why are there not credit freezes for children's, right?
Like, you saw the statistics, right?
Yeah.
10%. They did a
Please
survey.
tell us that. Tell us about that.
In the recent report, the Carnegie Mellon University did a report. So they looked at 10,000 social insurance numbers of children. And of that 10,000, 10% were compromised, right? This is children under the age of 18 years of age.
Yeah.
And why do criminals hit children? Because they're unused sins. By the time they're looking for credit or government services where they need to apply for something, it's too late and the criminals have racked up.
Yeah. Nobody's monitoring, right?
Nobody's
They say
monitoring.
nothing's, they're not using it, it's fine.
So Equifax in the US offers that to all children under 18, free credit freeze on their file. So they're allowed to put that freeze, and we're looking, investigating in
that makes
Canada
sense.
as well.
Yeah. Makes
Because
sense.
the two targets they hit hard are children and seniors.
Seniors.
Right. When we're talking about, breaches of our data, and, again, there's a lot that we can do to protect ourselves, but when that, comes out of the blue and mail starts getting, changed somewhere else, where we find out that there's some credit in our name, how much of a responsibility is there on us as the consumer to, let's say, today, get identity theft insurance, get credit monitoring? Like, where are we sitting in 2016? What's the table's recommendation of what we think the basic? I mean, it's like, this is where we're at, right? Hacktivism. We have new words. Where are we at for this?
Can I roll it back a little
Sure.
bit? So before it happens, and I really want, part of the insights I gained when looking at my case and dealing with so many people to raise awareness afterwards is to help people really understand the services that we use from the financial system. So, for example, if I share personally, I have a debit card. My husband and I, between us, we have several debit cards. That to me is an account, a card, and access, direct access to my bank account, our money. So I have a higher level of protection. I use that card very rarely. I tend to only use it with the bank or one of our major banks. Like that. That's a card that I treat very, very securely. My credit card is a different type of service that I use from the financial system. And I tend to use my credit card everywhere and then pay it off monthly with my funds. But because the credit card, I get a statement at the end of every month and I decide what I'm going to pay, and I challenge the charges that aren't mine if my information has become compromised, if that my name and the credit card number is in all these different databases, there's breaches, it's out of my control, what do I do? So before I want to spend any money, because I actually don't want to spend any money, I don't feel that I should have to spend money to protect myself from identity theft. I personally I've got a problem with that. So I want to make sure that I'm using those services right first. So I tend to use my credit card more because I'm more comfortable if my credit card information is compromised. Because really, it's the credit card company
It's not
that
your money.
I'm going to help them. I'm
not
going to
your
help
money,
them.
though.
I'm going to answer all of their questions. But I can manage that far more easily than working to fight to get the money back in my account. Right? That one really hurts. And so if I know that, and we can help people raise the confidence a little bit better and say, okay, I'm not going to use my debit card at the gas station I never go to, I've never seen. I've heard about these stories where they change the machines and they're swiping the card's data and they're giving the gas away for free. If I'm in that situation, I need gas, I'm going to use my credit card, not my debit card, not the direct access. Do people around the table, does that make any sense to you?
Credit card protection is phenomenal in Canada.
Yeah.
It's amazing that the whole counterfeit high-end goods schemes are still going on. Because if you go looking for, let's say, Ugg boots, Canada Goose, whatever, you do a search, Google, or it comes to you through Facebook, whatever. You go on a site, the site looks real. You place what you think is a legitimate order, for, by the way, ridiculously low prices, which you never really get. But you didn't know
This
at
is
the
an
time.
online purchase,
Buyer
okay?
beware.
Yeah.
You make your purchase, and you find out from the first email that seems to be coming from China, or 2 weeks later when you actually get the product and it's coming from a very low grade illegal factory in China. You realize that you've been had. You've got 500 days to get your money back. I mean, so if consumers
Through the credit card.
exactly,
Because
so
you're
if consumers were all aware of that, I don't see what the profit margin for the bad guys would be. And it's sad that the information is there. People do realize generally that they've been had. But they think, oh, it was my fault. I gave my credit card. No. You gave your credit card number legitimately. You weren't looking for stolen goods. You weren't looking for a knockoff and got poor quality compared to what you thought.
Yeah.
You legitimately made a you get your money back. So it's for consumers to be more aware of the protections that are there, make use of them, and make the bad guys at least come up with new schemes.
Right.
Yeah.
I take your point about getting the credit card statement. I think that's very important because you're not, this is something that's pushed to you and you don't have to pull.
It's true. Yeah.
So it makes it a bit easier for consumers to kind of keep track. But I will say that the protections for debit cards are also available. in the event of compromise. So there are the same protections, but there may be added benefits to the credit card by virtue of statements that are sent to consumers. So I just want to make sure that consumers know that they are protected for their debit cards as well.
And one other note on that as well, talking with actually Jane Rooney, our financial literacy leader, about this issue a while ago about, and we're going to get into seniors in a moment, the door-to-door person who I have a great deal on a roof right now, or siding, or whatever it is, and it's just $3,000 cash. Pay me now and I'll be back tomorrow. If you used your credit card for that, number one, that person probably doesn't have merchant services because they're a fraudster. But if they did, you would be protected if they didn't show up the next day. So I agree with you. There's a lot there with credit cards. Now, we're talking about the financial implications of fraud and identity theft here. In my last book, Protecting You and Your Money, A Guide to Avoiding Identity Theft and Fraud, that was published by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, and actually every single one of you here at this table were instrumental in providing me with research and resources, so I'm so grateful. Here's my official thank you, because that helped a lot of Canadian. It was definitely a collaborative and team effort. But one of the experts that I did interview shared a story about this young couple, very stretched with their last dollars going on a little vacation to Mexico with their small child. They arrive, they get there, and immediately he's put in a Mexican prison because somebody had committed a murder in his name with a Canadian passport. So right then and there's an issue with identity theft that goes far beyond anything to do with your dollars, right? This is your safety, this is your issue. So John, in that case, I mean, this couple didn't, what do? Your young husband is whisked away into a Mexican prison. You're stretched already, you have no dollars. I can think of a number of Canadians that might be in that same situation. Do we just need identity theft insurance today? Is that just a basic?
Well, it's not. It doesn't come down to identity theft insurance alone. Simply, I know Jennifer mentioned she didn't want to spend money in terms of protecting herself, but for something as little as $5 for 6 years, you can put an alert on your credit file to say, please contact me before granting credit. So nobody can really apply for credit in your name without you being contacted, that they know who you are. And
I think that is a very valuable for many individuals and Canadians.
And then they'll get that call, and it's not an inconvenience because it's a protection. So for $5, you can stay on your file for 6 years, and that's nothing. It's a small measure. And we get those calls where people are pulled over by the police, random stops, and they're harassed, and then they're taken into prison, taken into the courts, and this wasn't me. I didn't commit that crime. Somebody stole my ID, and all of a sudden robbing banks and doing a lot of nasty stuff. And worst case scenario, you end up in jail, like this poor fellow in Mexico.
Right.
It's hard to really, because the criminals are always one step ahead. We know they're always one step ahead. No matter what we're doing, they're always ahead of the technology. Like I see in Europe, they came up with a nifty tool where even on credit card purchases, you get a little ping on your phone saying transactions occurred.
Yeah.
So we're
And you can sign up for that here actually
And you
too.
can sign
I
up
do
for
have
here
that
too.
on my debit and my
Which
credit
some
card.
people do. It's an
Yeah.
effective
Absolutely.
tool. So
Yeah.
even for the credit
Right?
card
You're at
companies,
least aware of it as it's
you're
happening.
aware of it as it's
That's a really
happening.
good point.
Right? You don't need monitoring per se to know that.
Exactly.
And with the police side of it, something at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, when we come across a victim of identity fraud, we beg them to file a report with their local police. We're not telling them to, insist that an investigation is done, because sometimes the breach may have nothing to do with the local police, anything in their jurisdiction, but just so that the victim is covered to some degree for worst case scenario, for the unusual fallout, because most identity fraud will end up with cell phones, credit cards being obtained in your name, and if they have enough information, they will go after your own bank account. That's the big part of what we see ID fraud, the instances where it's going to be left at the scene of a heinous crime, that can and does happen. And my goodness, how much more secure would you feel if you had a local police report number to quote at that time, where people could look back and say, oh, this is likely where the bad guy has got this person's info.
So if worst case scenario is going to happen, you can always say, I filed a report, you can go look. I am who I say I am, they're not me. I let the local police.
And also with the local police report, you are going to be including the whole mechanism of how you think your ID was compromised. Because in some cases, it's, you get the phone call from the person who wants to fix your computer. once in, I mean, they've stolen all your information. Later on, you know, a change we've seen in this, which is so dramatic for us, is in 12 years ago, it was one phone call, one access to your computer, one payment on your credit card, they went their merry way. Now they've done all sorts of ins and outs that by the end of it, you know, which could be 4 or 5, you know, apparent companies later, you're in a situation where they're gone into your bank account, they've set up online banking for you, they're making payments from one place to another so that you think you're getting a refund from,
Right.
oh, it's just, it's amazing.
I know, we
what
could
they-
spend certainly
It's
a lot more
complex.
time on, John, did you
But
want
going to law enforcement is important because you
Yes.
have to be able to prove to the bureaus that it's authentic, right? Because some people, unfortunately, don't pay their debts and they're saying, well, it's not me, but it really is.
You've
right?
got to sift through
You
all
have
of
to
that.
sift through, we have to
Yeah.
authenticate it's you, and then your fraud statement, your affidavit you file that you've been a true fraud victim helps us,
Yeah.
you know, get those off your file, bring up your score, and help the individual consumer.
Yeah, and on the website that's going to be named at the end of this video, we'll have all these great resources as well. So if someone watching is a victim or knows of someone, they know where to go. So just moving on to a really key component to our identity, and I'm going to throw this out to the table. You know, are there some sweeping changes that we need in the financial industry, in government, or in both? And here's one that really comes to mind is our SIN, our social insurance number, is such a key component to a fraudster committing identity theft and the severe kind that our government, Service Canada, has actually stopped issuing social insurance cards, okay? Yet, come time for my tax assessment to be coming in, my full social insurance number is showing up on my statement. The banks, when, you know, it's the end of the year, the T4 and T5, all of that is coming in as well. The industry is not Xing it out, kind of like in the old days when we used our credit card in the full, you know, we had to walk around shredding our little receipt. You know, I mean, that's just one that comes to mind, but, I mean, comment on that as a table, or are there other ones that you can think of?
For the SIN, for example, we have a give-get rule at Equifax. If an institution provides a SIN to us, we'll provide it back to them in their credit file. If they don't, we won't. But you had mentioned earlier credit freezes for children. So we think it's a great idea in terms of isolating those SIN numbers that belong to children under the age of 18, so they're not compromised and dealing with the repercussions after the fact and having to rehabilitate their good name at 19 years old when they haven't even applied for a cell phone. So that's one area where we think we can delve into with working with government and our partners here at the table to help at least children get a fresh start when they do hit that age of majority.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I would have never known that unless I would have been here talking to you today. So I think it's important for our kids, protecting our kids.
Well, that's the thing, is this topic is so vast. I'm sure we'll have this roundtable again, hopefully, to continue the conversation. Does anyone want to add anything more to that?
Well, just with the SIN, I mean, the SIN is ID only for the specific entities that need it. Like, you shouldn't be giving it to anybody who doesn't have a legal requirement for it. As simple as that. You know, if-
Just say no, less is
Exactly.
better.
And if they refuse you service and they can't provide it in writing, why, you know, you have to provide it, go to the privacy commissioner and there'll be changes real quick.
Yeah, because there are some provinces where even I've done radio interviews where callers have said that hydro companies are asking them for their SIN. In research for that book, soccer clubs are asking for the child SIN. And we as Canadians are so polite oftentimes that we just provide this information, not asking why it's needed, how it's going to be used, and how it's going to be stored. So great tips. Now I just want to kind of turn the tables a little bit to another really vulnerable part of our society is Canadians that have done really well with their investments. And they've amassed some dollars. And they are hopefully trying to steer away from some people like Bernie Madoff. What are the table's thoughts on, you know, the level of education or lack thereof of Canadians understanding what a third-party custodian is? So in Canada, we have one like National Bank Correspondent Network that would be that third party that, because right now, the Financial Planning Standards Council will tell you that anyone in Canada can hang their hat to say that they're a financial planner, which scares me, except in Quebec. So what are your thoughts on how educated Canadians are on what that even means to have a third-party custodian really looking after, let's say, the funds of a wealth management firm?
I think there's a huge range. There's some people who understand what that is very clearly and will make sure whoever they're dealing with, where you're helping me make the decisions, but the money's over there, right? And then there's other people that have no idea. So we were talking a little bit beforehand about the need to educate around and maybe beginning very early, maybe going right into high school. I don't know when we start about educating people about the financial system, and that there are people who are taking the opportunity to go after our money, right?
I mean, suggest to do your due diligence on these individuals. Remember, we had somebody come over the house, a house cleaner, and I said, can I get a copy of your driver's license, ID, something, so I know who you are, and I can do a background check on you because you're in my house, you're cleaning my house. Who knows?
Now that is some confidence.
Right?
I'm not sure every consumer would have quite that confidence, but good tip, John.
Something you just think of,
Yeah.
especially when they're dealing with your
taking notes.
investments.
Yeah, exactly. We're all learning something from this.
Thanks, Commissioner. But it's your
Yeah.
money, right? So you want to protect it.
That's right.
Anyone else have any comments on that?
Well, most of what we see at the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre for Mass Marketing Fraud is outright criminal groups, complete phony personas, no real information at all. There are a lot of investment schemes that people do, report to us, and where it's a case of a real individual, whether in Canada or the US, that seems to be where most of the bad guys are affecting Canadians. For that type that we see, the internet has everything on them. If somebody is successfully scamming folks now, chances are they were doing it 10 years ago, and
It's true.
Yeah.
look
It's
it up,
true.
verify.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you spend the time to look into what you're dealing with, and sadly, so many consumers tell us, after the fact, I Googled the guy, and oh my Lord, he was
Or they
one-
move province from province.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They start in BC and work their way east.
right, but the internet has it all.
Yeah.
So.
And not to give up your money easily. If somebody is coming to you and asking for your money, whatever story or scheme or great opportunity they have, if you haven't solicited that conversation, beware. Like, don't have it. Don't.
If it sounds too good,
Indeed.
too good to be true, it probably is.
On that note, and continuing with the investment vein here for a moment, here's a big concern of mine, and a lot of research that we had in the last book was on, bad land deals, on exempt market type deals, and these tend to be large dollars, 150,000 plus. My concern is that the stock markets as we speak are tumbling globally.
Yes.
And when these fraudsters come to an investor and say, you're down 10, 20, 30%, you don't even know what you're really investing in. Look at this land deal. Look at this whatever it is that you can touch and feel and see. And there's variations of them. These dollars tend to be very large, and my heart goes out to those that are defrauded for grandparent schemes of $3,000 or $4,000. I mean, there's so many levels. This tends to be a large level one. What's the table's thoughts on some tips for how do we help Canadians really grasp that if a GIC is only paying this over here, you cannot get guaranteed 20% on a land deal over here. There's some red flags that need to be known.
Well, we've been talking about these for a long time, but maybe people need to know more and more how active the criminal community is involved in these types of scams. So in the work that I do, we've got a team, we investigate fraud, we're forensic accountants. We are regularly engaged by law enforcement and other groups to do the source and use of funds analysis on people who are committing these investment type scams, Ponzi schemes. They have this whole story. And people need to understand that these are happening commonly, and people are losing significant amounts of money. It's 20, 25,000, and then the amounts multiply very quickly, right? We get up to hundreds of thousands of dollars and hundreds of victims in these scams, and it's significant. And so maybe we need to let people know that more of these are happening. And there's parts of our community, the law enforcement community, I feel that, sort of the network around me is quite knowledgeable and aware of this. So don't give up your money easily. Like, if you don't know who these people are, if you can't see the fine print, if you don't understand the corporate structure of these groups that are saying, look, you're investing your money here, there's the land. What are all the dots between your money and the land, right? There's a corporate structure, and when it all falls down, there's usually very little money left
Right.
for the investors who gave up their money. So be aware. Don't give up your money.
And typically in these scams, you see a lot of documentation, even something as simple as spelling errors, right? You see a lot of these documentation have the similar spelling errors and mistakes, and it's a common theme that we see seem to see in a lot of fictitious documentation or fraudulent documentation, something as simple as that. Would a big corporation not spell check and have all their nice collateral, complete with no spelling errors? It's something just to look at it. It kind of raises always my eyes when I see something like that from a big corporation. Either their marketing department didn't catch it, or it's a scam.
Or they didn't give you any documentation at all because they don't want you going to your accountant. They don't want you getting any third-party advice from a lawyer or financial planner. Anyone else want to comment on that?
I would just say that, obviously we do need to do more to educate the public, and perhaps it's time for another book, Kelley. Focusing
We'll talk, for sure.
in on trends and increasing trends, and because, things keep changing and getting more complex out there, it appears. And not enough people know or are aware of these things that they need to watch out for.
And don't you find too that a lot of times individuals will, maybe you can comment on, look at these large investments, yet not spend a few $100 or a few $1,000s to come into a qualified maybe CPA to get a second opinion? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we hear that all the time. I mean, it's really unfortunate. I mean, oftentimes with people with lots of money are as susceptible or more susceptible than others because perhaps it's a sense of confidence of the fact that they have a lot of money and something sounds good, it's coming from a friend, a colleague, whatever, and they don't take the time to do the due diligence that they should.
For sure. So steering back to the internet and the source, unfortunately, of the criminal attacks. Now, Jennifer, when I interviewed you just about 2 years ago, and you were also the technical editor on the book, you were pretty passionate about what you thought about our, how we should approach internet banking, that we should maybe even have a separate computer, let's say at home, if your kids are going online. Where are you now? Where are you now, and what you recommend in your comfort level with internet banking, mobile technology, all of that?
So this gets back to the consumer, the individual being really aware and understanding that if we used to just have one computer in the household that was hooked up to the internet, to the system, and now we have so many different devices. So if we're using every device to access that, those accounts of ours, our financial accounts, our investment accounts, our bank accounts, just step back for a moment and understand and I'm not an IT person, but the network that the people who are cyber criminal specialists, how they look at the network, all these different devices are access points to those financial accounts that they want to target to get the money. So every time we're using a different device and we're putting in our information and we've got our account numbers and our passwords and all those things, we become vulnerable to the cybercrime to just target that access point, that entry point.
Particularly, I will say, if you're transacting business online in an area, a coffee shop or in a mall, where the Wi-Fi may not be secure.
Yes. So all the different devices, all the different networks, all the different places we use it. So just to think about, well, if I'm going, my bank accounts, my financial accounts, I'm going to protect them. I'm doing all the right things with the passwords. Think about how you and where you access them, because that's important too. And then if we just think for a moment about the other side, the financial institutions, the banks, the companies saying, well, maybe, because I need you to do the right things as the consumer.
Absolutely.
And if you open up the doorway for the cyber criminals, maybe they're going to get to. So I'm going to, and this is still in the future, I think. I don't think we're there yet, but certainly at the conferences, the communities, I'm seeing more and more talked about this. So maybe I'm going to, if I'm the bank, I'm only going to let you access your account through a device that I give you on a network that I provide, because then I can secure it.
Right.
That's coming. So right now we're at a point where you can go to any coffee shop, you can, the free network, you get in, but they're all vulnerable, and we're starting to learn about all those different pathways. So as the individual, just be really aware, be really cognizant. And if you need to access it at that moment, sometimes we need to, but try to do it on networks that you know are secure. You know them, you trust them. So it's a lot happening.
That's great point. And technology is changing so
Yeah.
rapidly. We have mobile payments, we have near field technology. Lucie, can you comment a little bit on how we protect ourselves as Canadians?
Absolutely. I have to say, though, that I do find the use of mobile payments very convenient
Yes.
for payments and for banking. And so, and I'm all for innovation in the marketplace, right?
Yeah.
But in December of 2013, the FCAC published a paper on mobile payments and consumer protection in Canada. And what we flagged in that report were a couple of risks that consumers might be exposed to. And one of the risks is because there's so many players involved in mobile payments. So now you don't have just your relationship with your FI or your financial institution. You have the payment card network operators. You have the mobile network, your financial institution, the device manufacturer.
Yeah.
So what happens is consumers might think that they have, that they're all of those providers provide the same protection. Well, they might provide protection, but the protection differs. So they need to be aware of that they might not all have the same protections for all these parties. And the same is true for dispute resolution and consumer redress, right? So, one of those stakeholders may not have a dispute resolution system or a consumer redress system. So consumers need to find out who has what and what they are precisely protected for before they actually go in blindly and start making mobile payments. The other risk we identified, of course, is because we are using electronic devices, and electronic devices are exposed to malware, and of course malware then exposes consumers to identity theft. So my advice to consumers would be just to make sure, because there's so many parties involved in mobile payments, make sure you ask, how am I protected? And, if there's a problem, where do I go? And what will you do for me?
And that you can find, following up on Commissioner Tedesco's statement, find in the privacy policy. Read these privacy. How many of us read privacy policies when they go on sites? Very few.
Maybe just some of the people at this table, but generally.
But consumers generally, who would go and look at the
Yeah.
Samsung privacy policy when they're using a Samsung device, or look at the bank's privacy policy when transacting.
Yeah, we need to start standing up for ourselves. And I mean, speaking about that, I look at my smartphone, and I wonder how many Canadians have protected it adequately. Especially, let's talk now a little bit about probably the most vulnerable segment of our population, and that's of seniors. And they might look at, someone like myself might get my mom a new smartphone and having a lot of fun getting on Facebook and doing all these things, but not realizing that this is a computer in her pocket. So if she's online on a computer or just an innocent enough phone in the comfort of her home, how do we really get this segment of our population to grasp what phishing is? What an online romance scam is, that that somebody could actually do this in another country, could be there and pretend and send these false pictures when because they didn't grow up with computers, and some of them, not all of them, might not be as savvy. Maybe I'll start with you, Daniel, and I'll also bring it back to, are there nudges within the government, within industry, of, if we could segment out who gets OAS and gets CPP, could we send them a little something in the mail, giving them a tip sheet, or online banking when you're logging in, if we know that they're of a certain age, could we give them some nudges? What's the table's thoughts? To start with you.
Well, with seniors being defrauded online, it is a massive, really heartbreaking problem. When you speak to a senior who, they've been widowed, the kids have moved out, they're alone in the country, somebody convinces them to get online, and they start the Facebook, they start this, reaching out, life is, full now for them. And then the scammers, from miles away, thousands of miles away, can zoom in on them. And once they've made the connection, they lose everything. And it pains me when you look at the costs of this and that. Here's this person, and one of the main things they're telling me is, I'll never go online again. So the bad guys have stolen that
It is a shame.
from that person. Without and it's and you see so much damage that the criminals do for a few lousy bucks. Like they destroy lives. They'll burn down a house to cook their egg. And think nothing of what they leave in their wake. And it's we're up against a lot.
Cairine, do you have any thoughts on what more we can do specifically to help protect our seniors?
We have a financial education program for seniors. It's part of our overall Community Connect volunteer program. We have 12,000 CPAs now across the country who are trained to deliver free financial education sessions on a variety of topics. And we have two specifically on fraud, and one is specifically for seniors. And the seniors presentation on fraud really delves into the various types that you talked about, the grandparent scheme. There's the captain calling, you've won a cruise prize one. There's an endless number of things. And we talk about those, and we tell people to be specifically on their guard for those. And as well, to your earlier points about protecting your devices, we also mentioned that, and that's very important when we give these seminars. And we actually launched our seniors fraud program last November in St. John's, Newfoundland, at a public library, and Jane Rooney was there, and it was very, very well received, and we're rolling it out across the country.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
Of course, an important aspect, I think, is to raise awareness that there are tons of resources out there for seniors. I know that we've developed, the FCAC's developed a life event around living in retirement that has an entire section dedicated to preventing fraud and protecting against financial abuse. And we've also developed a financial literacy database where organizations across the country have contributed their material for seniors, and seniors can surf that database based on their target group and based on the topic. And so they will find everything there, from books to webinars, websites, tip sheets, and educational programs. There's also the National Strategy for Financial Literacy that was launched in June of 2015. And it has as one of its very specific goals to prevent and protect against fraud and financial abuse. And there is kind of a sub-strategy to that strategy that is designed to meet the specific needs of seniors. And it has as one of its goals to increase the number of tools that are available to seniors to combat financial abuse. And I know Jane Rooney, the financial literacy leader, is working very hard with stakeholders to make sure that there are more tools out there to help seniors.
And how about tools for, and I know that your program has that with CPA Canada, Cairine, but how about more tools for kind of the frontline individuals that might be a banker, an accountant, a lawyer that sees this? Are there programs that are specifically targeted to the industry to help educate? I know you were on a call once with CPA Canada talking about to go to your bank, and I can't remember specifically what you were referencing, but I thought, I'm not sure that the front end banker would know exactly what to say to help that individual protect themselves, for online banking and all of this. Like, are we at the point where we really need some type of industry training to help, the professionals to also educate Canadians?
I think we're close. So it sounds like there's lots of resources, and maybe that's how we've got to intersect them.
Right.
So in some of the work that I do, I see that there's programs, elder abuse, which is really the fraud, the financial. that some of our financial institutions and some of our investment groups are starting to offer those programs. So maybe we need to find a way to get these resources together with those groups so that it's delivered right in the front lines.
And then one further step, I hate to be morbid here, but when somebody passes away, a loved one, don't forget to put a death notice on both their credit files, both with Equifax and our competitor TransUnion. Make sure there's a death notice, because criminals prey on those victims who are deceased. They use their identities, and there's nobody there to complain because the person's gone. So, and then the loved ones are left cleaning up the mess years and years after because of the trail that these criminals have left. So put a death notice on the file right away.
Tip,
so when a bank pulls
Yeah.
Jane Doe's file, they know
Yeah.
that person's been deceased, and
Because that's so easy for any criminal to just go through the obituaries and
Exactly.
find out. So just we're going to wrap it up here pretty soon. So we touched on seniors. I know, Lucie, you wanted to also touch on another vulnerable segment, and that's new Canadians.
Well, absolutely. It's very topical, actually. And, there's a very sad trend where new Canadians are being increasingly targeted by criminals and are defrauded by criminals. And typically, these individuals, these criminals, will hold themselves out as being government officials and signal a problem with the immigration documentation. And lo and behold, they can help, of course, fix the problems for a fee. And while we all know that that's not the way we do business in Canada, newcomers might not know that. I mean, it's stressful enough trying to integrate for life in a new country without having to worry about being defrauded. But thankfully, there are lots of organizations and resources out there to help newcomers. One of the first points of contact should be the Department of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship, where there's a wealth of information. In fact, they have created a workbook for newcomers, to which our agency has contributed information.
Free?
It is free.
That's
It is
great.
free, and it touches on general information on basic banking, the Canadian financial system, how that works, how to use a debit and credit card. So very basic information to help those newcomers. I know that there is ABC Life Literacy, who works with organizations who are that are helping new Canadians integrate into Canadian society. And I know, Cairine, you guys do a lot
have
of work
some
in
programs as well.
that space, and have workshops for new Canadians.
That's excellent, yeah. So just before we wrap it up, one of our most vulnerable also, segments moving forward is those of young Canadians, teens and young adults. And although they're exceedingly tech savvy, I worry that from my nieces and nephews, from the the young people in my life, I don't see them really grasping privacy and grasping the criminal activity that's going on, and why me, and who am I, and why not share everything of where I go. And it's not just the financial aspect, it's you as a person. That if criminals know that where you go to school and when you're leaving your home and these types of things, I'll throw it out to the table. How do we help our young adults, either through educating them as parents, as the industry, as government, to really grasp what their life is going forward with convenience versus privacy?
I think it's incumbent upon us as institutions, be it people at this table or this other industry, to educate at an early age. Get in the high schools, the elementary schools, teach them to set your privacy settings at the most stringent possible, and share with only people you want to share with. Don't open it up to the world. So education is crucial from the outset.
I mean, I have an 18-year-old, and is very active on social networks and those kinds of things. And he's applying for university now. And I said to him, early on, you've got to be careful about what you put out there in terms of your own personal information, because if once you get to the point where you're applying to school, getting a job, the employer or prospective university will be looking at your profiles and the information that you've put out there and the pictures that you've put out there. So is that really how you want to come across? So hopefully
And that stays there forever. Yeah.
it stays there forever. Indeed.
Unfortunately, even if it's deleted, they don't grasp that that imprint is
Indeed.
there. Any final words, Jennifer?
It's so important for us to all be aware and to know these things and to put out there what we want to live with. But also the concept of privacy is changing. So I think that the institutions who are using our data, and I'm going back to the financial system, less the rest of our lives. We have to think about how our financial infrastructure is changing as our concepts of privacy and how we interact and use these devices and networks, how all of that is changing. I think we need to put a little bit more responsibility on the institutions as well, so that that criminal group who's coming forward with all those names to access money and accounts, there's more responsibility and obligation put there, so it's not just on the individual, because it's changing. I was informed a few months ago that I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. Their world is going to be very different than mine, and I get that now, right? So that the world really is through the device. So some of our infrastructure has to change as well, and we've got to bring the privacy and the security along with that, and that's going to be the complexity we have to figure out.
Yeah. Final words, Jennifer?
It's amazing how much of our lives out there in the open. Closed circuit TV in every major city, drones. People can look in on any part of our life at any time. The idea that we're in control over who gets to see what, I think, is such a last century thing, and we have to just embrace the reality of everybody has access. What can we do? We can monitor. We can take a look at our credit report. We can keep an eye on our bank account, our credit card statement. Be aware, because by God, the bad guys are aware of it as well.
Well said. Cairine?
Yeah, and the sooner we make it a habit, the better. So absolutely start young. Start teaching kids in the schools that they need to be aware of all of these things.
And you're right, it should be a habit, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. I know we could have extended this conversation much more, and even before the conversations that were being had, we're very interested. So many great resources, and I want our viewers to know that all of this is going to be available on the website that's listed at the end of this video. We'll be updating that as well with new information, new statistics. I want to thank you all so much for being here. Cairine Wilson, Daniel Williams, Jennifer Fiddian-Green, Commissioner Tedesco, and John Russo. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.